Our next speaker is Chris Benedict, who's actually going to be talking about a lot of the work going on in Washington here. Chris Benedict is a professor and regional extension specialist with Washington State University in Whatcom County and is the WC lead of the Washington Soil Health Initiative. So Chris is going to be discussing an overview of the Soil Health Initiative's activities to date.
Okay, you can hear me, Deirdre, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
One sec. Typical screen share issues. Okay, you should be able to see that now.
We are seeing the presenter view.
Oh, you are. Lovely. Okay, that should be good, right, Deirdre? Okay, so good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank and point out that today is 2/2/22, and it also happens to be a Tuesday. So all corny jokes aside, I'm going to talk about the Washington Soil Health Initiative. I think several of you are probably cognizant of this effort, but I think several of you might not be. And I think we really need to celebrate the sort of the onboarding of this effort. And I do want to point out that I'm speaking, but I'm also speaking on behalf of the two other leads at the other agencies, Danny Glardy and Allison Halpern. So I'll be sharing their contact information and a little bit later. So let's jump in. So the Soil Health Initiative started to kind of amalgamate in 2018, and funding from the state sort of in an entry phase began in 2019. And that first initial phase really targeted efforts on a few different things, but ultimately with essentially full funding coming online about close to 8 months ago, Washington State entered into a dramatic paradigm shift in the amount of money, the resources that are invested in soil research, outreach, and incentive programs. And I'm going to go into depth about that here in a second, but it created a tri-agency framework for a coordinated effort, and it accelerated soil health as a priority issue at the state level. And it virtually overnight placed Washington State as one of the preeminent leaders in state-supported soil health activities. It utilizes new, but also, utilizes existing, but also new soil capacity in the state. And most interestingly, it creates the most densely concentrated network of long-term agroecological research and extension experiments that I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And relative to the discussion that was just occurring, it also incentivizes landowners to undertake soil health practices, or at least that's the intention. So, as I mentioned, this is a tri-agency effort that focuses that includes the Washington State Conservation Commission, the Washington State Department of Agriculture, and WSU. And each one of these agencies has a unique role, and I believe they're very complementary. But the State Conservation Commission, the vision is that they would provide technical support and incentivize adoption and increase outreach efforts. WSDA would track and demonstrate progress at the statewide level and work across regulatory programs, again, at the state level. And WSU's role was, at least from the onset, was to develop a soil health roadmap that I'll talk about here in a second. But also, and probably in the bigger picture and longer term, is to drive research and information dissemination. And this is where these LTARs, as we're calling them, come into play. But the three agencies work together in concert. And I think that each one of these efforts, as by design, is really quite complementary. So let me talk about the Washington State Soil Health Roadmap. I'll just point out that you can reach it at soilhealth.wsu.edu or by taking a photo of that QR code with your phone. This was an effort that began in 2019. It was led by WSU, but contributed by many others. And process is that we broke the state into sort of focused production zones. And these areas, these are sort of larger production systems that are similar. And in that area, we utilize existing resources to document a variety of different things like what are some goals for that particular production system? What are the problems? How do we incentivize? How do we change things? And sort of to set up milestones as we go forward. And those, each one of those sort of focus areas was led by a different individual at WSU. And beyond that, we encompassed and sort of summarized sort of similar themes across those focus areas that's included in the roadmap. It's a 126-page document, so it's not a quick read, but there are some executive summaries, and I would really hope that people get to check it out. I will point out that it is a living document, and it's done this by design. When we change goals, we change milestones, we're going to update this document. And so what I urge to people, while it is a PDF, is that to not necessarily download it and sort of store it away, but view it, access the content you want, and then when you need to re-access it to go back to the website to do that. One of the other big efforts that started in 2019, I believe, it might have been 2020, I'm losing track of the years, is a state of the soils assessment. And this was done in concert between WSDA and WSU. And sort of this is an effort to track soil health over time across the variety of production systems that exist in the state. And to date, the initiative has created nearly 400 samples from 400 fields from 20 different cropping systems. Initially is to develop a baseline understanding of soil health, sort of what is the state where we're at. But in long run is to sort of monitor that and to determine, if we're making incremental changes and improvements. Thirdly is to kind of develop a soil health scoring curve. For those of you that don't know what these are kind of specific to production systems and soils. And more information can be obtained about that through some of the context I'll share here at the end. And another goal is to try to determine specifically what measurements are relevant for specific soils and cropping systems. And in the long run is to develop a soil health database that could be accessible by people. So let's switch gears and talk about the LTARs, or the long-term agroecological research and extension sites. One of the key issues that soil scientists deal with, to some of the questions that John was just talking about, is that much of the research is sort of short-term funded. And a lot of the changes that we see in soils needs time. And so sort of core to the initiative is to provide funding for several LTAR sites across the state of Washington. And as I mentioned, as far as I can tell, the state sort of becomes, in a short order, the most densely concentration of these, at least in the US. But they represent major cropping systems. And they will specifically be located on WSU-owned property so that longevity can play out. And they're designed with input from local advisory groups. And the really fascinating thing is that they are funded in perpetuity, or at least that's the goal. We just went through a process internally to try to determine which sites would be brought online in the short term. And in 2022, we're starting to move forward on 4 sites. One that actually started in Northwestern Washington, Mount Vernon in 2020. It will enter into its second year of cropping crops this year. An additional one that's going to be occurred at WSU Puyallup is a diversified organic West Side Washington agriculture and will include integrated livestock, tree fruit in the Wenatchee area, wine grapes in the Prosser area. And in the short future, we're hoping to bring on a Columbia Basin potato-oriented rotation that will likely take place in Othello and a dryland site to be determined at this point in time. And then lastly, I just want to take a minute and talk about what I think is sort of the crux of how we sort of move forward is a program called the Sustainable Farms and Fields Program. This was enacted by the legislature in 2020. It only provided seed funding for the State Conservation Commission to sort of get it underway, come up with a system of how it would work. And several people are working to try to secure funding. The goal to use these resources for is adoption and change at the landscape level. This would include grants that would support practices that increase carbon sequestration in both vegetation and soil, but simultaneously to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve overall soil health. Some examples would include maybe purchasing shared equipment like no-till drills. Like I said, this is being led by the State Conservation Commission, and we're hopeful to move forward with securing the funding to run that program. I just want to point out that I mentioned sort of the three core collaborators, but from day one, there's been a whole variety of other industry representatives that have supported this effort. And it's really brought together groups of people from a diversity of backgrounds and interests that I think, frankly, have not always had a common conversation. So it's really positive in that regard. And I'll just end on some contact information. These are the associate leads for each of the tri-agency groups. And if you want to get more information, the URL is above there, but I know those can sometimes be kind of annoying to write down or try to copy. So you can access that by snapping a photo of or using your camera. With that, Deirdre, I will try to take any questions if there are any. Well, doesn't look like there's anything that's come up. Right, am I missing that?
Yeah, I think there's no questions right now.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. Oh, there is one that just came in. How do you measure success with the Washington Soil Health Initiative?
Okay, first I'll just plug that people should be engaging above with the feedback mechanism. So how do we measure success? Well, a lot of that is documented in the roadmap, and will sort of vary by region, by production system. Each sort of zone, I will bring that slide back up in here in a second, has very different set of goal and milestones. And so those are very important, that we need sort of a flexible ability to offer success at the statewide level, because they may be different in different areas, but there were clear common goals and milestones that came out of those discussions. And I will say that there was actual discussions. I didn't point that out. So I would reference that at this point in time. And I noticed there's a comment about trying to work with Oregon. I would love to see more states come online with such efforts. I will point out in that roadmap that there is a breakdown of what is going on in the United States for other soil health initiatives. They're all over the map, literally. But in this case, in terms of what their focus is, California probably has the best funded and longest running, I would say, initiative, but it's very different in what it does than to Washington State. As far as the Altair sites open to the public, They will definitely be at certain points. I don't think we can just have people obviously roaming around research plots, but there will be associated field days, et cetera. Okay, are there Altair plans at Wilkie? Yes, there are. That is one of the ones that are hoping to come online in the near future. So will you ever go to actual growers to help measure and improve soil health? I think if I'm understanding that comment or question directly, is that yes, that is what the effort that was underway as part of the state of the soils assessment. Though I should have pointed out that those samples all came from commercial farming fields, and just to parallel with that, the goal of the Sustainable Farms and Fields program is, the whole goal, sort of an impetus of that, is to incentivize adoption, and that would include measurement on commercial fields. So, did I miss anything, Deirdre?
Don't believe so.
Okay.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Chris, for that overview of the soil